The tide has just pulled back, leaving pools of water caught in the hollows of rock. At first glance, they might seem like simple puddles scattered across stone. But lean closer. Watch the surface. Beneath that mirror of sky and cloud lies one of the most demanding habitats on Earth, a place where life must endure what seems impossible. Welcome to Bedtime Biology, where science meets serenity. Each night, we explore the quiet wonders of the natural world, calming your mind and sparking your curiosity. If you like these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and commenting below if you have any feedback or suggestions for topics of future episodes. Tonight, we're visiting the edge where ocean meets land, a narrow band of rock that transforms twice daily with the rhythm of the tides. Here, in these shallow basins of seawater, creatures face challenges that would overwhelm most living things. They must breathe both water and air. They must withstand temperatures that swing from near freezing to scorching hot in a single afternoon. They must cling to stone while waves crash with the force of hurricanes. They must survive hours without the ocean, then hours submerged beneath it, then hours exposed again, on and on, every day of their lives. And yet life doesn't just survive here, it flourishes. These pools teem with animals and plants so specialized, so ingeniously adapted, that they've turned one of the harshest environments into a thriving community. From barnacles that cement themselves permanently, to rock, to sea stars that can pry open shells with hydraulic power, to fish that learned to breathe air when the water runs low on oxygen. Tide pool inhabitants have evolved solutions that seem borrowed from engineering textbooks. Each creature is a testament to the power of adaptation, to life's relentless drive to fill every available niche, no matter how difficult. We'll explore how they do it. We'll discover the hidden mechanisms that let a limpet return to the exact same spot on a rock after feeding, wearing a depression into stone over years. We'll learn how barnacles, despite being rooted in place for life, manage to reproduce with neighbors using appendages that would make any anatomist raise an eyebrow. We'll see how animals coordinate thousands of tiny hydraulic tubes to move and feed, how they create protective slime to seal in precious moisture, how they survive being frozen, baked, battered, and submerged, sometimes all in the span of hours. These aren't grand animals. Most are smaller than your hand. Many are smaller than your fingernail. But together, they've built ecosystems as complex as any rainforest, as interconnected as any coral reef. And they've done it in a place where the rules change twice a day, where nothing is constant except change itself. So let's wade into these pools. Let's turn over rocks gently and peer into crevices. Let's watch the slow ballet of tube feet, the patient grazing of limpets, the territorial wars of anemones. Let's discover how life thrives where ocean and land meet in the remarkable, resilient world of tide pools. Twice each day, the ocean advances and retreats, following rhythms set by the moon's gravity tugging at Earth's water. When the tide is high, these rocky shores lie submerged beneath waves, part of the sea. When it pulls back, it leaves behind pools in every depression and hollow, temporary aquariums scattered across the intertidal zone. This is the region between the highest reach of high tide and the lowest extent of low tide, a strip of coastline that belongs fully to neither land nor sea. The pools themselves form wherever rock holds water. A crack becomes a pool. A depression worn by countless waves becomes a pool. The space between boulders becomes a pool. Some are barely larger than a teacup, warmed quickly by the sun and evaporating to near saltiness. Others are deep basins the size of bathtubs, maintaining more stable conditions even as the tide recedes. Each pool becomes its own isolated world for the hours until the ocean returns, a microcosm with its own temperature, its own salinity, its own oxygen levels, all changing independently of the sea itself. The transformation happens in silence. As the tide falls, water drains away through channels and over edges. Waves that were crashing moments before become distant sounds. The pools go still. Now, the sun has direct access to everything that was cool and dark beneath the waves. The temperature begins to rise. On a summer day, a shallow pool can heat from 50 degrees to 70 degrees in an hour, then to 80 or 90 if the sun beats down long enough. In winter, the same exposure can chill the water until ice crystals form at the edges. The animals inside cannot leave. They must endure whatever their particular pool becomes. Salinity shifts just as dramatically. Fresh water from rain can dilute a tide pool, dropping the salt concentration suddenly. The creatures inside, adapted to seawater, must cope with cells that want to swell as water rushes in. Or the opposite happens. On hot days, evaporation concentrates the salt, making the water more saline than the ocean. Now, cells want to shrink as water is drawn out. Either way, the internal chemistry of every organism must adjust, regulating the flow of salts and water across membranes to maintain the right balance inside their bodies. Some animals, called osmoregulators, actively pump ions in and out to keep their tissues stable. Others, osmoconformers, simply let their internal salt levels match the external water, tolerating the change. Oxygen presents another challenge. When the tide is in, waves splash and churn, mixing air into water, keeping oxygen levels high. But once a pool is isolated, the oxygen trapped inside can only decrease. Fish and invertebrates consume it. Algae produce some during daylight through photosynthesis. But at night, even the plants become consumers, breathing in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. By dawn, a tide pool can become dangerously low in oxygen, forcing its inhabitants to either tolerate the shortage or surface to gulp air. The water itself may turn slightly acidic from accumulated carbon dioxide, adding yet another variable to manage. Wave action, when the tide returns, brings its own dangers. Water moving at speed exerts tremendous force. A wave breaking against rock can generate pressures exceeding several tons per square meter. Animals must grip tight enough to resist being torn away and flung back out to sea or smashed against stone. Those that can't hold on don't survive to reproduce. Natural selection in tide pools is brutal and immediate. Every high tide is a test. Every low tide is an ordeal. The animals that live here have passed both tests millions of times over evolutionary history, refining their defenses until they became specialists of this narrow, turbulent world. Different heights on the shore present different challenges. The highest pools, near the splash zone, spend most of each day exposed to air, heating and cooling dramatically. Visited by the ocean only during the highest spring tides. The lowest pools, near the subtidal edge, remain underwater most of the time, briefly exposed during the lowest ebbs. In between, lie gradient after gradient of intermediate conditions. Species sort themselves by tolerance. Those that can handle the most extreme conditions live high. Those that need more stable marine conditions stay low. Visit a rocky shore at low tide, and you'll see this zonation clearly. bands of life arranged by height, each species marking the limits of what it can endure. And yet, for all these challenges, there are advantages too. Nutrients wash in with every tide, bringing food and oxygen. Sunlight penetrates the shallow water, allowing algae to photosynthesize vigorously, forming the base of the food web. Predators from deeper water, the large fish and sea stars and crabs that hunt subtidally, are kept out during low tide, giving smaller prey a reprieve. The constantly changing conditions may be harsh, but they also keep competition and predation in check. Only specialists can thrive here, and those specialists have the place largely to themselves. Life in tide pools, then, is life at the edge, its existence in a habitat that demands tolerance, flexibility, and ingenious adaptation. But for the animals that have mastered it, the rewards are real. Food is abundant, space is available, and twice a day, like clockwork, the ocean returns to refresh and renew, carrying away waste, delivering nutrients, restoring the connection to the greater sea. The pools are never truly isolated. They're just temporarily alone, waiting for the water to come back and make them whole again. The first rule of life in the intertidal is simple. Don't get swept away. Every incoming tide brings waves that could pluck an unattached animal from rock and carry it out to sea, where it may drift until it starves or is eaten. Evolution has solved this problem in multiple ways, creating animals that grip stone with a tenacity that borders on absurd. Barnacles are perhaps the ultimate example. These small crustaceans, related to crabs and shrimp, spend their adult lives fixed to rock in postures that seem almost defiant. They begin life as free-swimming larvae, drifting in the plankton, but when the time comes to settle, a young barnacle must choose a spot carefully. It explores the rock surface with chemical sensors, testing for the right texture, the right exposure, perhaps even detecting the presence of other barnacles nearby. Once it decides, it cements itself in place, using one of the strongest adhesives known in nature. This glue, secreted from glands in the barnacle's head region, contains proteins that cure rapidly underwater, forming a bond so strong that trying to remove a mature barnacle usually breaks the barnacle rather than the glue. The barnacle is now part of the rock, as permanent as the stone itself. It will never move again. The shell it builds around this cemented base is equally impressive. Made of overlapping calcareous plates, the shell can close completely, sealing the barnacle inside against desiccation, predators, and temperature extremes. When the tide is out, barnacles shut tight, trapping moisture in their shells, essentially holding their breath until the water returns. When submerged, they open a set of plates at the top like a tiny volcano, and feathery appendages called cirri emerge, sweeping through the water to capture plankton and detritus. These cirri are actually modified legs, transformed by evolution into food-gathering devices. The barnacle, upside down and glued by its head, kicks food into its mouth with its feet. It's a bizarre arrangement, but it works spectacularly well. Limpets take a different approach. These cone-shaped mollusks, close relatives of snails, don't cement themselves down. Instead, they rely on a muscular foot, broad and powerful, that creates suction against rock. The limpet's shell, shaped like a flattened cone, deflects wave force and provides a low profile that's hard for predators to grasp. But what truly sets limpets apart is their homing behavior. Each individual claims a spot on the rock called a home scar, and after feeding excursions across the stone, grazing on algae with a tongue covered in microscopic teeth, the limpet returns to this exact spot. Over time, the edges of its shell were a depression into the rock surface, creating a custom-fitted seal. When the limpet settles into this scar and clamps down, the fit is nearly perfect, minimizing water loss and making the animal almost impossible to dislodge. The limpet navigates back to its scar using a combination of methods, possibly following chemical trails in the mucus it secretes while moving, possibly using visual cues detected by simple eye spots, possibly even remembering the topography of its territory. The tenacity of limpet attachment is legendary. Trying to pry one off rock is difficult even for humans with tools. The foot's muscles contract powerfully, and the suction created between shell and stone can resist pulls of many times the animal's weight. Predators that want to eat limpets must catch them during feeding, when they're moving and not fully clamped down, or use strategies like dropping them from height to break the shell. When a limpet is locked onto its home scar, it's nearly invulnerable, a tiny fortress of calcium carbonate and mussel. Mussels cluster together, forming dense beds on rocks, and each individual attaches using structures called byssal threads. These threads are proteins secreted by a gland in the mussel's foot, spun into fibers that cure into tough, flexible strands. One end of each thread glues to the rock with an adhesive plaque. The other end anchors inside the mussel's shell. A single mussel may produce dozens of these threads, creating a network that distributes the force of waves across multiple attachment points. If one thread breaks, others hold. The threads themselves are remarkable materials, combining strength and elasticity, able to stretch without snapping when water surges. Engineers study byssal threads as models for adhesives that work underwater, seeking to replicate the mussel's ability to glue itself securely, even in wet, turbulent conditions. The collective attachment of many mussels creates stability for the whole bed. Individuals at the edges take the brunt of wave force, but those in the middle are sheltered. The bed becomes self-reinforcing. Animals cluster close, each one providing slight protection for its neighbors. Over time, mussel beds can persist for decades, growing layer upon layer as new recruits settle on top of older individuals. These beds become habitats themselves, providing spaces for other organisms to hide among the shells, turning a simple attachment strategy into the foundation of a community. Chitons, often called coat of mail shells, wear armor made of 8 overlapping plates embedded in a tough girdle of tissue. This segmented shell gives them flexibility, allowing their bodies to conform precisely to irregular rock surfaces. The underside is a broad, muscular foot, similar to a limpet's, that generates powerful suction. A chiton can press itself flat against stone, its shell plates molding to every bump and ridge, creating a seal that's hard to break. If dislodged by a predator or a particularly violent wave, the chiton can curl into a ball, protecting its soft underside, and wait for a chance to right itself and reattach. The 8 plates articulate smoothly, letting the animal flex and bend, while still maintaining complete coverage. It's armor that doesn't sacrifice mobility, a design so effective that chitons have remained essentially unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. All these strategies, cementing and clamping and threading and molding, serve the same purpose. Stay attached, resist the water, don't let the ocean take you where you don't want to go. In a habitat where the fundamental challenge is holding position against forces that could easily carry you away. Attachment isn't just important, it's everything. And the animals that master it, whether through glue or suction or flexible armor, earn the right to live in one of the most productive edges of the sea, where food is abundant and competition, paradoxically, is limited by the very harshness of the environment. Organisms that live permanently underwater have a straightforward relationship with oxygen. They extract it from the water using gills. But tide pool residents must manage two entirely different respiratory environments, sometimes switching between them multiple times a day. This requires adaptations that blur the line between aquatic and terrestrial life, creating animals that are neither fully fish nor fully amphibian, but something in between. Some tide pool fish have developed the ability to breathe air directly. The tide pool sculpin, for instance, can survive in oxygen-depleted water by coming to the surface and gulping air. Oxygen diffuses through the lining of its mouth and throat, entering the bloodstream even though the fish has no lungs. This isn't true air breathing in the sense of lung-breathing vertebrates, but it's enough to supplement the oxygen obtained through gills, letting the sculpin survive conditions that would suffocate other fish. Young opaline fish, which spend their juvenile stages in tide pools before moving to deeper water as adults, have similar abilities. They tolerate low oxygen by accessing the thin layer of oxygenated water right at the air-water interface, essentially breathing from both sides of the surface. These adaptations become critical during nighttime low tides, when photosynthesis stops and every organism in the pool consumes oxygen. By dawn, the water can become so oxygen poor that fish begin surfacing repeatedly, gasping. The ability to extract even a little oxygen from air means the difference between surviving until the tide returns or dying in the pre-dawn darkness. It's a marginal advantage, but in a marginal habitat, small differences determine who persists. Sea anemones face different challenges. As cnidarians, animals related to jellyfish and corals, they have no gills and no circulatory system. Oxygen simply diffuses across their body surfaces from the surrounding water. When the tide goes out and an anemone finds itself exposed to air, it must prevent its tissues from drying out while also managing gas exchange. The anemone's solution is elegant. It retracts its tentacles inward and contracts its muscular column, forcing water out and collapsing into a compact blob. What remains on the rock surface looks almost like a mushroom cap or a blob of jelly, far from the flower-like beauty of a submerged anemone with tentacles extended. But this collapsed form serves a purpose. The anemone is conserving the water trapped inside its body cavity. It's also reducing the surface area exposed to air, minimizing evaporation. The outer surface of the column secretes mucus, forming a layer that slows water loss further. In this dormant state, the anemone can survive for hours out of water, its tissues staying moist enough to function. When the tide returns, the animal relaxes, draws in fresh seawater, and expands back into its full form, tentacles unfurling to catch prey. The transformation is so complete that someone unfamiliar with anemones might not recognize the collapsed low tide version and the expanded high tide version as the same creature. Some anemones go further, creating microhabitats for other animals. Research has shown that certain species of Anthopleura anemones slowly release stored water during low tide, producing a slightly cooler, more humid zone around their bodies. This water leakage is part of evaporative cooling, helping the anemone regulate its own temperature. But it also benefits mobile invertebrates like snails and small crabs, which cluster near the anemones to escape the heat and dryness of exposed rock. The anemones become oases, small pockets of more favourable conditions in an otherwise harsh environment, accidentally facilitating the survival of other species through their own physiological processes. Periwinkle snails, common in tide pools across much of the world, have evolved one of the most elegant solutions to the breathing problem. These small gastropods possess both gills for underwater respiration and a modified tissue in their mantle cavity that functions somewhat like a primitive lung when exposed to air. They can switch between the two modes as needed, extracting oxygen from water when submerged, and from air when the tide is out. But they must keep this lung-like tissue moist to function effectively, so periwinkles cluster in crevices during low tide, in places where water still clings to rock, or where shade reduces evaporation. They also have a hard plate called an operculum, a kind of trapdoor attached to the foot that can seal the shell's opening when the snail withdraws inside. This operculum isn't just for protection against predators, it's a critical water retention device. With the operculum closed, the snail traps moisture inside its shell, creating a humid chamber where it can wait out low tide. Some periwinkles secrete additional mucus to strengthen the seal, effectively gluing themselves to rock and to their own operculum, creating a double barrier against desiccation. When conditions are particularly harsh, they may remain sealed for days, barely metabolizing, almost in a state of suspended animation. Only when the environment improves, when the tide returns or rain falls, do they break the seal and resume activity. This same operculum serves during high tide as a door that can close against predators. If a crab approaches, the snail retracts into its shell and slams the operculum shut, presenting the attacker with a hard surface rather than soft flesh. It's a multi-purpose adaptation, useful in both the aerial and aquatic phases of the tide pool cycle, protecting against desiccation on one hand and predation on the other. The snail doesn't have to think about which threat it's facing. The same behavior, withdrawing and closing the door, defends against both. Other mollusks use similar strategies. Limpets, when clamped to their home scars, trap water in the space between shell and rock, creating a moist environment under the shell that keeps their gills functional during low tide. The tight seal prevents evaporation. Some limpets can even extract oxygen from this trapped water, essentially breathing the same water over and over, much like a diver rebreathing the air in a small chamber. It's not ideal, but it's enough to survive until the tide returns and fresh, oxygenated water flows in. The ability to breathe in two worlds, to extract oxygen from both water and air, defines many tide pool species. They're amphibious, not in the sense of living partly on land and partly in water by choice, but in being forced to manage both by the rhythms of the tide. They've evolved respiratory systems that work in either medium or at least tolerate exposure to air long enough to survive. It's a compromise, a set of solutions that aren't perfect for either environment, but good enough for the strange in-between world where ocean meets stone. Among the most remarkable inhabitants of tide pools are the echinoderms, a group that includes sea stars, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers. These animals move, feed, and even breathe, using a system so unusual it seems like science fiction. It's called the water vascular system, and it's a network of fluid-filled canals and hydraulic tubes that runs throughout the animal's body, powered by nothing more complicated than changes in water pressure. In a sea star, which we'll use as our example, the system begins with a small pore on the top surface of the animal, called the madreporite. This acts as the intake valve. Seawater flows in through the madreporite and enters a channel called the stone canal, named for the calcium deposits that give it rigidity. From the stone canal, water moves into a circular ring canal that encircles the animal's central disc. From this ring, 5 radial canals extend out, one running down the length of each arm. Along each radial canal are hundreds of tiny branches leading to tube feet, the small, flexible cylinders that project from the underside of each arm. Each tube foot has 2 parts. The visible external portion, called the podium, ends in a suction cup. The internal portion, hidden under the sea star's skin, is a muscular sac called the ampulla. The ampulla and podium are connected, forming a closed hydraulic unit. When the ampulla contracts, it squeezes water down into the podium, extending the tube foot and pressing the suction cup against the substrate. Specialized cells in the suction cup secrete adhesive compounds, strengthening the grip. Now the tube foot is anchored. The ampulla relaxes, maintaining water volume in the system, and muscles in the podium itself contract, pulling against the anchored suction cup. This generates force, dragging the sea star's body forward. Repeat this process with hundreds of tube feet, coordinating their movements in waves, and you get locomotion. It's slow, far slower than a snail's pace, but it's powerful and precise. A sea star can move over irregular surfaces, up vertical walls, even across ceilings if the suction is good. The animal doesn't have a brain in the traditional sense. Instead, it has a nerve ring and radial nerves running through its arms, coordinating tube feet through distributed nervous control. Each tube foot responds to local conditions, its own angle and length, and adjusts its activity accordingly. The collective effect of hundreds of these independently acting units produces smooth, directed motion. But the water vascular system does more than just move the animal. It's also a feeding tool. Sea stars are voracious predators of mollusks. When a sea star finds a mussel or clam, it positions itself over the shell and attaches tube feet to both halves. Then it pulls. The tube feet don't need to generate enough force to tear the shell apart immediately. They just need to pull steadily, exerting constant pressure. Mussels and clams have muscles that hold their shells closed, but these muscles fatigue. They can't maintain tension indefinitely. The sea star can. It's a contest between muscle that tires and hydraulic pressure that doesn't. Eventually, the shellfish's muscle weakens and the shell opens, even if just a crack. That crack is all the sea star needs. It everts its stomach, pushing it out through its mouth and into the tiny gap between the shell halves. The stomach wraps around the soft tissues of the prey and begins digesting them externally, turning the mussel's body into a semi-liquid soup that the sea star then absorbs. When the meal is finished, the sea star retracts its stomach, pulls its tube feet free, and moves on to find the next victim. It's a gruesome process, but remarkably efficient. The sea star doesn't need to swallow anything whole. It just needs to insert its stomach into the prey and digest it in place. The tube feet also function in gas exchange. Their thin walls allow oxygen to diffuse in and carbon dioxide to diffuse out, supplementing the small gills that sea stars have along their arms. This means a sea star is, in a sense, breathing through its feet, using the same structures that let it move and feed to also manage respiration. It's a multi-purpose system, elegant in its simplicity. One network, one design principle, applied to solve 3 different problems. Sea urchins, close relatives of sea stars, use their tube feet primarily for locomotion and holding food. The spines that give them their pincushion appearance are defensive structures, but beneath those spines, hundreds of tube feet project outward, each one capable of extending surprisingly far from the body. An urchin moves by coordinating these tube feet in waves, pulling itself along the bottom or up rocky surfaces. The feet are strong enough that an urchin can grip rock firmly, even in surge zones where water rushes back and forth. If you try to pull an urchin off rock, you're fighting against dozens of hydraulically powered suction cups, all working together to resist you. The precision of the water vascular system is remarkable. A sea star can detect and move toward prey using chemical cues in the water, then position its tube feet with enough accuracy to grip a mussel shell's smooth surface. A sea urchin can manipulate food items with its tube feet, passing pieces of algae from foot to foot toward the mouth on its underside. These aren't simple reflexes. They're coordinated behaviors requiring sensory input and motor control, all accomplished without a centralized brain, using only distributed nerve networks and the mechanical properties of hydraulic tubes. In tide pools, where animals must grip rock against waves, the water vascular system gives echinoderms an advantage. Suction cups work well on smooth surfaces, but they also adapt to rough textures, conforming to irregularities. A sea star can cling to a boulder covered in barnacles, its tube feet finding purchase in every tiny space. It can cross from one substrate to another, from shell to rock to algae-covered wood, without losing grip. The hydraulic principle scales well. Small tube feet work just as effectively as large ones because the pressure is distributed. Each foot pulls with force proportional to its size. And if a sea star loses an arm to a predator, the water vascular system can regenerate. The animal grows a new arm, complete with its own radial canal and tube feet, restoring full function over weeks or months. Some sea stars can even regenerate an entire body from a single severed arm, provided the arm contains part of the central disc. It's a level of regeneration almost unmatched among complex animals, and it's possible because the sea star's body plan is so decentralized. There's no single vital organ whose loss is fatal. The nerve ring can be partially destroyed. Parts of the stomach can be lost. Arms can be torn off. As long as enough of the animal survives, it can rebuild what was damaged. In a habitat as physically demanding as the intertidal, where storms can smash animals against rocks and predators can bite off limbs, the ability to regenerate is valuable. Combined with the versatility of the water vascular system, it makes echinoderms some of the most successful tide pool predators. Slow-moving but relentless, hard to dislodge and hard to kill, always gripping, always pulling, always searching for the next meal among the rocks. Life in the intertidal has shaped some of the most unusual reproductive strategies in the animal kingdom, driven by the fact that adults are often sessile or slow-moving, making conventional mating difficult. Barnacles exemplify this challenge. As adults, they're glued to rock, unable to move, and yet barnacles don't reproduce asexually. They need to mate with other individuals to maintain genetic diversity. How does a stationary animal accomplish this? The answer is both simple and startling. Barnacles possess the longest penis relative to body size of any animal, up to 8 times their own length in some species. When the tide is in and barnacles are submerged, individuals extend these extremely long, flexible appendages, searching for neighbors. The penis gropes blindly through the water, waving back and forth until it contacts another barnacle. If the neighbor is receptive, meaning it's currently functioning as a female, the penis inserts itself through the opening in the target's shell, depositing sperm directly into the mantle cavity where eggs are stored. Fertilization occurs internally, and the brooding barnacle will later release larvae into the water. This system works when barnacles live in dense clusters, which they often do. A single barnacle can potentially reach several neighbors with its elongated penis, increasing the chances of successful mating. But it only works within a limited range, about 3 to 5 centimeters for most species. Barnacles farther apart can't reach each other. For a long time, scientists believed that isolated barnacles, those living more than penis length away from neighbors, must self-fertilize. Some barnacle species can self-fertilize in laboratory conditions, though it's rare and usually produces weaker offspring. Recent research revealed a surprise. In some barnacle species, isolated individuals found far from any neighbors still produce fertile eggs. Genetic analysis of these eggs showed they were fertilized not by the parent, but by sperm from distant barnacles, sometimes many centimeters away. How is this possible? The answer is sperm casting. These barnacles release packets of sperm directly into the water at high tide. Currents carry the sperm to other barnacles, even those beyond penis reach. Receptive females capture sperm from the water column, using the same cirri they normally use for filter feeding. It's a method previously unknown in barnacles, a backup strategy for situations when conventional mating isn't possible. This discovery overturned over a century of assumptions about barnacle reproduction. It showed that even animals as sedentary as barnacles have multiple reproductive strategies, able to switch between direct mating and broadcast spawning depending on circumstances. In wave-exposed shores where barnacles might be scattered rather than clustered, sperm casting could be the primary method. In sheltered areas with dense populations, direct penis-mediated mating might dominate. The barnacles themselves likely don't choose consciously. They simply release sperm when conditions trigger it, and evolution has shaped those triggers to maximize fertilization success. The length and shape of barnacle penises also shows adaptation to environment. In areas with strong waves and turbulent water, barnacles have shorter, thicker penises that are harder to damage or wash away during mating. In calmer waters, penises are longer and more slender, able to reach farther but more vulnerable to being broken by surge. Its phenotypic plasticity, the same species producing different penis morphologies depending on where it grows up, fine-tuning its anatomy to local conditions. Sea anemones take a different approach. Many species reproduce asexually through longitudinal fission, splitting themselves down the middle to create 2 identical clones. Over time, a single anemone can produce a large colony of genetically identical individuals, all clustered on the same patch of rock. These clones recognize each other, likely through chemical cues, and tolerate close proximity. But when 2 different clones meet, when the expanding edges of separate colonies touch, something remarkable happens. They go to war, anemones engaged in territorial fighting use specialized tentacles called acrohagi, usually located near the base of the tentacles and distinguished by white or pale tips. These fighting tentacles contain concentrated stinging cells, far more potent than the ones used for capturing prey. When an anemone detects a non-clone neighbor encroaching, it extends its acrohagi and presses them against the intruder. The stinging cells fire, injecting venom and leaving damaged tissue. The other anemone responds in kind, and the two engage in slow-motion combat, each trying to drive the other away. These battles can last hours or even days, the anemones repeatedly stinging each other until one retreats. Eventually, a clear border forms between the two colonies, a demilitarized zone where neither side ventures. The anemones have established their territories, and they maintain the boundary through occasional skirmishes whenever one side tests the line. This behavior benefits the clone as a whole. By excluding other anemones from their territory, the clones reduce competition for space and food. The individuals on the edges of the colony act as defenders, taking the brunt of attacks but protecting those in the middle. It's cooperative defense without cooperation in the traditional sense, since the individuals are all genetically identical. They're protecting themselves by protecting copies of their own genes. Sea anemones can also reproduce sexually. Some species are hermaphroditic, producing both eggs and sperm, though usually at different times to avoid self-fertilization. Others have separate sexes. When conditions are right, often in response to seasonal temperature or day length changes, anemones release gametes into the water. Eggs and sperm meet in the open ocean, far from the intertidal zone, and the fertilized eggs develop into tiny larvae that drift with currents. These larvae eventually settle on rock, transform into miniature anemones, and begin the cycle again. Sexual reproduction shuffles genes, creating genetic diversity that helps the population adapt to changing conditions. Asexual reproduction through cloning allows rapid expansion of successful genotypes in stable conditions. The anemones use both strategies, toggling between them as circumstances favor one or the other. Other tide pool animals rely entirely on broadcast spawning. Mussels, urchins, and many snails simply release their gametes into the water during high tide, synchronized across the population so that eggs and sperm are released simultaneously. This synchronization is critical. If one mussel spawns alone, its gametes will be diluted in the ocean and unlikely to meet partners. But if hundreds of mussels spawn together, the water becomes dense with eggs and sperm, and fertilization rates are high. The triggers for synchronized spawning vary. Some species respond to specific water temperatures. Others spawn during particular phases of the moon, coordinating with tides. Some release pheromones that trigger spawning in neighbors, creating a cascade effect where one animal spawning prompts others to spawn, amplifying the event. The larvae produced by broadcast spawning drift as plankton, sometimes for weeks, traveling far from their birthplace before settling. This dispersal helps colonize new areas and prevents inbreeding. But it's also incredibly risky. The vast majority of larvae die, eaten by filter feeders, washed into unfavorable habitat, or simply failing to find appropriate settlement sites. Those that do survive and settle successfully have won a lottery against enormous odds. To compensate, each adult produces thousands or tens of thousands of gametes, a numbers game where success depends on overwhelming the losses with sheer volume of offspring. In the intertidal, where physical disturbance can wipe out entire patches of habitat during storms. This reproductive strategy makes sense. Local populations may be destroyed, but larvae from nearby populations drift in and recolonize the empty space. The system is resilient at the regional scale, even if individual locations are ephemeral. Adults sacrifice certainty for reach, producing mobile offspring that can settle kilometers away. It's a bet on dispersal, on the idea that some offspring somewhere will find suitable habitat and survive to reproduce in turn. And it works, evidenced by the fact that tide pools around the world are full of animals using this strategy, generation after generation, colonizing rocks, reproducing and sending their young into the open water to seek their own fortunes. Every tide pool is a marketplace where nutrients and energy change hands through countless transactions of predation, grazing, and filter feeding. The base of this economy is sunlight, captured by algae that coat every rock surface and drift as microscopic phytoplankton in the water. These primary producers convert solar energy into organic molecules, and everything else in the pool ultimately depends on this photosynthesis. But the pathways from light to top predator are diverse and interconnected, creating food webs so complex they challenge easy description. Algae take many forms in tide pools. There are large, visible seaweeds, the kelps and rockweeds that sway in currents, providing structure and shelter. There are smaller filamentous algae, hair-like strands that drape over rocks. There are encrusting coralline algae, pink and hard, almost indistinguishable from the stone they grow on. And there are the microscopic forms, diatoms and single-celled algae, forming slimy films that coat everything. All of them photosynthesize. All of them grow rapidly when conditions are good. And all of them face grazing pressure from herbivores that scrape, nibble, and filter them out of the water. Limpets are among the most important grazers. These mollusks crawl across rock surfaces using their broad muscular feet, and as they move, they scrape algae with a specialized feeding organ called a radula. The radula is like a tongue covered in teeth, a flexible ribbon studded with rows of hard, sharp structures made of chitin and sometimes reinforced with iron compounds. The limpet presses its radula against the rock and pulls it backward in a rasping motion, shearing off algae and even grinding away tiny amounts of the rock itself. Over years, a limpet can erode measurable grooves in stone, carving channels as it follows the same paths repeatedly. The teeth on a limpet's radula wear down from this constant scraping, but new rows of teeth continually grow at the back of the radula, moving forward as older rows are shed. It's a conveyor belt of teeth, each one used until it's too worn to be effective, then discarded. The newer teeth behind it take over. This allows limpets to feed continuously on the toughest algae and even on young barnacles and other settling organisms, keeping their territories scraped clean. In areas with dense limpet populations, rocks can be almost barren of visible algae, everything edible removed as fast as it appears. This intense grazing pressure affects which plants can survive. Only those that grow extremely fast or that can hide in crevices inaccessible to limpets persist in heavily grazed areas. Chitons use similar radulae, though their teeth are even harder, reinforced with magnetite, an iron oxide mineral. This makes chitin teeth some of the hardest biological materials known, capable of scraping coralline algae and other tough surfaces without breaking. The chitin's slow crawl leaves behind a clean path, algae scraped away in a trail that marks where the animal has fed. Like limpets, chitons follow home ranges, returning to favourite spots after feeding, often sheltering under rocks during low tide to avoid desiccation and predators. Periwinkle snails graze as well, though they tend to prefer softer algae. They move across rockweeds and sea lettuce, using their radulae to punch holes in the blades or to scrape away surface cells. In high densities, periwinkles can consume entire algal blooms, leaving behind bare rock or only the toughest, least palatable species. Their feeding affects the composition of the algal community, favouring species that can tolerate grazing, either by growing fast enough to outpace losses or by being unpalatable enough that snails avoid them. Filter feeders take a different approach, capturing food from the water column rather than grazing surfaces. Barnacles, when the tide is in, open their shell plates and extend their cirri, sweeping through the water to capture phytoplankton, zooplankton, and detritus. The cirri are covered in fine hairs that trap particles, and the barnacle periodically brings the cirri back to its mouth, scraping off the captured food. It's passive feeding in the sense that the barnacle doesn't chase prey, but active in that it must constantly move its appendages to pump water through them. The barnacle is essentially a tiny pump, creating flow through its cirri and filtering out anything edible. In a single day, a dense bed of barnacles can filter large volumes of water, removing substantial quantities of plankton. Mussels filter even more efficiently. Each mussel draws water in through an inhalant siphon, passes it over gills covered in mucus and tiny hair-like cilia, and expels the filtered water through an exhalant siphon. The gills trap particles, which are then transported to the mouth by the cilia and consumed. A mussel can filter several litres of water per hour, and a mussel bed containing thousands of individuals can process enormous volumes. This feeding has ecosystem-level effects. Mussel beds clarify the water, removing suspended particles and concentrating nutrients. They also produce waste in the form of feces and pseudofeces, packaged particles that sink to the bottom, feeding detritivores and enriching the sediment. Predators patrol the higher levels of the food web. Sea stars are perhaps the most iconic. As we've discussed, they prey on mussels, barnacles, clams, and other mollusks, using their tube feet to pry open shells and their everted stomachs to digest prey externally. A single sea star can consume dozens of mussels over its lifetime, and populations of sea stars can control mussel abundance, preventing any one species from dominating all available rock space. When sea stars are removed from an intertidal area experimentally, mussel populations often explode, covering the rock and excluding other species. The sea star, by eating mussels, maintains diversity, keeping space open for barnacles, algae, and other organisms. Crabs are opportunistic predators and scavengers. They hunt for snails, tear apart dead fish, scavenge bits of algae, and generally eat whatever they can catch or find. Their claws are powerful enough to crush small shells, and they're fast enough to catch slow-moving prey before it can retreat. Crabs move easily between pools and across exposed rock, tolerating air exposure well, which lets them exploit the intertidal more fully than purely aquatic predators. They're also cannibalistic, eating smaller or injured crabs when the opportunity arises. This keeps crab populations in check, preventing any one cohort from becoming too dominant. Dogwhelks, predatory snails, drill through shells using a combination of mechanical rasping and chemical dissolution. They press their radula against the shell of a barnacle or mussel, scraping away layers while also secreting acids that weaken the calcium carbonate. Over hours, the whelk bores a neat hole through the shell, then inserts its proboscis and consumes the soft tissues inside. It's a slow form of predation, but effective. Whelks can access prey that other predators can't, eating animals that are glued down or locked in shells. Sea anemones are sit-and-wait predators, anchored to rock, tentacles spread, waiting for prey to blunder into them. The tentacles are armed with nematocysts, stinging cells that fire barbed threads tipped with venom. When a small fish or shrimp brushes against the tentacles, the nematocysts discharge, injecting toxin and tangling the prey in sticky threads. The anemone then bends its tentacles toward its mouth, stuffing the paralyzed prey inside. Digestion occurs in a simple gut, and undigested remains are expelled through the same opening. Anemones can capture surprisingly large prey relative to their size, and they're patient, able to wait days or weeks between meals if necessary. All these feeding relationships interconnect. Algae eaten by limpets are also eaten by snails. Snails eaten by crabs are also eaten by sea stars. Barnacles filter phytoplankton that might otherwise settle and become algae. Mussels filtering plankton compete with barnacles for the same food, but mussels also provide substrate for algae and shelter for small invertebrates. The web is dense with interactions, and removing any one species ripples through the system, affecting others in ways that aren't always predictable. This complexity creates resilience. If one food source fails, predators can switch to alternatives. If one predator is removed, others can increase. The system absorbs shocks and continues functioning, though in subtly altered forms. Tide pools are also sites of nutrient cycling. Waste from animals fertilizes algae. Dead organisms are broken down by bacteria and small detritivores, releasing nutrients back into the water. Every high tide brings in fresh nutrients from the open ocean, and every low tide concentrates what remains in the pools, creating a patchwork of nutrient-rich and nutrient-poor habitats. This spatial variation adds another layer of complexity, with some pools supporting lush algal growth, while others, perhaps shaded or scoured by waves, remain relatively barren. Animals move between pools, tracking resources, and in doing so, they redistribute nutrients, connecting the pools into a larger landscape-scale network. In all, the feeding ecology of tide pools is a study in efficiency and opportunism. Every organism eats or is eaten. Every nutrient is recycled. Every bit of energy captured by algae eventually flows up the food chain or back into the detrital pool. The system hums with activity, invisible most of the time, but revealed when you look closely, when you see the limpet's radula scraping, the barnacle's cirri sweeping, the sea star's stomach engulfing a mussel, the anemone's tentacles coiling around a shrimp. It's a continuous ballet of consumption and growth, playing out twice daily between the tides. Survival in the intertidal demands not just tolerance, but active defense. And tide pool animals have evolved an arsenal of protective strategies that range from physical armor to chemical warfare. These defenses determine which animals live where, shaping the distribution of species across the intertidal gradient. Shell morphology is the first line of defense for many animals. The shape and thickness of a shell reflect the pressures an animal faces in its particular microhabitat. Limpets in wave-exposed areas tend to have taller, more conical shells than those in sheltered spots. The higher shell reduces hydrodynamic drag, letting water flow over the animal rather than catching it and potentially dislodging it. The limpet in a sheltered pool, facing less wave force, can afford a flatter profile, which increases surface area for attaching, but would be vulnerable in high waves. This variation occurs even within a single species, individuals growing different shell shapes depending on where they settle, an example of phenotypic plasticity shaped by local conditions. Periwinkle snails show similar patterns. Those living in wave-exposed zones have thicker shells with narrower apertures, the opening through which the foot emerges. The thick shell resists crushing by predators and the battering of waves. The narrow aperture makes it harder for crabs to extract the snail's body. In contrast, periwinkles in calmer waters have thinner shells with wider apertures, allowing faster movement and a larger foot for gripping smooth surfaces. The trade-off is clear. Thick shells cost more energy to build and carry, but provide better protection. Thin shells are cheaper and allow faster growth, but are more vulnerable. Each population balances these costs based on local risks. Coloration serves camouflage. Many tide pool animals are mottled brown, grey, or green, blending into the rock and algae backgrounds. Chitons are famously cryptic, their segmented shells often covered in algae and detritus that clings to the girdle, making them nearly invisible unless you know what to look for. Limpets, though conspicuous when seen from above, are hard to spot when clamped to rock at odd angles, their shells matching the stone's colour. Even larger animals like crabs may be countershaded, darker on top and lighter below, reducing the shadow that would otherwise make them stand out to aerial predators like gulls. Some animals take a more active approach, using toxins and stings. Sea anemones arm their tentacles with nematocysts, and while these are primarily for capturing prey, they also deter many potential predators. Fish that brush against anemones learn quickly to avoid them. Some crabs can handle anemones, manipulating them carefully to avoid the sting, but most animals give them a wide berth. The anemone's bright colours, often reds and greens, may serve as warning signals, advertising their defensive capabilities. Sea urchins are walking pincushions, every surface covered in spines that make them difficult to grasp and potentially painful to bite. Some species have venomous spines, injecting toxin when broken off in a predator's mouth or foot. The spines are not individually strong, but en masse they form effective armour. An urchin wedged into a crevice, spines pointing outward, is nearly impossible to dislodge without tools. Sea stars and certain large fish are among the few predators that can handle urchins, either tolerating the spines or flipping the urchin to access the less defended underside. Nudibranchs, shell-less sea slugs, often borrow defences from their prey. Some species feed on anemones, consuming the tentacles but not digesting the nematocysts. Instead, they sequester the stinging cells in specialised structures on their own bodies, recycling the weapons for their own defence. Other nudibranchs feed on sponges, ingesting toxic compounds that make the nudibranch distasteful to predators. These slugs often advertise their toxicity with bright warning colours, reds, yellows and purples that stand out against the muted tones of the intertidal. Predators that try eating one quickly learn the association between bright colours and bad taste, avoiding similarly coloured slugs in the future. Behavioural defences complement physical ones. Many animals hide during low tide, retreating to crevices, under rocks, or into mussel beds where predators can't reach them. Crabs scuttle sideways with surprising speed, using their agility to escape pursuit. Small fish dart between rocks, using the complex terrain to break line of sight with predators. Even slow-moving animals like limpets can sense the approach of predatory snails through chemical cues in the water, and respond by moving away or clamping down more tightly. Clustering is both a defensive and a survival strategy. Mussels cluster into dense beds, individuals packed tightly together. This provides some protection from predators by overwhelming them with numbers. A sea star can only eat so many mussels. A whelk can only drill so many shells. If the bed is large enough, most individuals survive even if a few are eaten. Clustering also helps with moisture retention during low tide. Animals on the edges of a cluster are exposed to air, but those in the middle benefit from the humidity created by their neighbours. Temperature is also moderated. The mass of bodies insulates against rapid heating and cooling. Similar benefits accrue to barnacles, anemones, and other species that aggregate. The group provides what the individual cannot achieve alone. Mucus, often overlooked, is a critical defensive tool. Many mollusks produce mucus that tastes bad or is difficult to digest, discouraging predators. Mucus also reduces friction, helping animals move more easily, and it prevents desiccation, sealing moisture against shells. Some snails produce particularly thick, glue-like mucus when disturbed, making them almost impossible to swallow. The mucus gums up a predator's mouth, forcing it to spend time cleaning rather than eating. And often, the predator gives up and seeks easier prey. Mucus trails left behind by moving snails also provide chemical information to other snails, potentially warning them of predators or guiding them to food. Finally, many tide pool animals have remarkable abilities to regenerate lost body parts, a form of defense that works after an attack. Sea stars can regrow arms. Sea cucumbers can regenerate internal organs. Crabs can regenerate lost claws over successive molts. Even some snails can repair damaged shells. This doesn't prevent predation, but it mitigates its impact. An animal that survives a partial predation event can recover and continue reproducing, whereas in other habitats, a similar injury might be fatal. The ability to heal from severe damage is valuable in an environment where physical trauma from waves, rocks, and predators is common. All these defenses interact, creating layers of protection. An animal might have a thick shell, cryptic coloration, and an unpleasant taste. A predator must overcome all three to successfully feed. This redundancy ensures that even if one defense fails, others may still provide protection. And because different predators have different capabilities, animals often specialize in defenses against the most common or most dangerous threats they face, allocating their resources where they'll be most effective. The result is a diverse array of protective strategies, each one an evolutionary response to the specific dangers of life in the tide pool. Tide pools might appear uniform from a distance, but up close they're mosaics of microhabitats, each with distinct conditions. A single pool can contain sunny shallows and shaded depths, algae-covered rocks and bare surfaces, crevices filled with sediment and open spaces swept clean by currents. Animals sort themselves into these microhabitats based on their tolerances and requirements, creating patterns within patterns. The algae covering rocks are themselves habitat. Rockweeds, the large brown algae common in temperate tide pools, form canopies that shade the substrate beneath, keeping it cooler and moister than bare rock. Beneath these canopies, a community of small invertebrates thrives, animals that couldn't survive the exposure of an open surface. Snails graze on the algae. Amphipods and isopods, tiny crustaceans, scurry among the fronds. Juvenile fish hide in the tangle of stems and blades. The algae provide not just shelter, but also food, both directly as their tissues are consumed and indirectly as they support microbial films rich in bacteria and diatoms. Sea anemones, as mentioned earlier, create microhabitats through their water release behavior during low tide. The puddles and damp areas around anemone colonies attract mobile invertebrates seeking refuge from heat and desiccation. This happens unconsciously. The anemones aren't providing a service intentionally, but the effect is real. Other animals benefit from the anemone's presence, and in areas with high anemone density, invertebrate diversity can be higher than in areas lacking anemones. It's a form of facilitation, where one species modifies the environment in ways that benefit others. Mussel beds, too, are complex structures. The spaces between mussel shells create habitat for worms, small crabs, brittle stars, and juvenile snails. These interstitial spaces are protected from wave action and predators, providing a relatively stable environment in an otherwise dynamic zone. Mussels themselves benefit from this association. The small invertebrates living among them help clean the substrate, removing sediment that could otherwise smother the mussels. Some may also consume parasites or fouling organisms that attach to mussel shells. The relationships are complex, not always mutualistic, sometimes commensal, occasionally parasitic, but always increasing the structural complexity of the habitat. Crevices and overhangs offer critical refuges during low tide. Animals retreat into these spaces to escape sun, wind, and aerial predators. A crevice can remain damp long after surrounding rock has dried, creating a pocket where gills can still function, where mucus doesn't evaporate, where survival is possible. Chitons wedge themselves deep into crevices, their flexible bodies conforming to the space. Crabs hide under boulders, waiting for the tide to return. Even mobile animals like fish use crevices as temporary shelters, squeezing into spaces barely larger than their bodies to hide from gulls and other birds that hunt the exposed intertidal. Seasonal changes add temporal variation to spatial complexity. In spring and summer, when sunlight is strong and water temperatures are warm, algae grow rapidly. Pools become choked with green and brown vegetation, and animals that rely on this productivity flourish. Herbivore populations increase. Predators that feed on herbivores also increase. But in fall and winter, storms tear away much of the algae, waves scour the rocks, and growth slows. Pools become more barren, dominated by encrusting organisms and animals that can withstand the harsher conditions. Some species retreat to lower zones or to subtidal areas, reducing their presence in the high intertidal until conditions improve. This seasonal flux creates a dynamic equilibrium. No single state persists year-round. The pools cycle through periods of high productivity and periods of scarcity, of high diversity, and periods when only the toughest species remain. Animals that can track these changes, moving up or down the shore, expanding and contracting their ranges, do well. Those that are fixed in place must tolerate the full range of variation, and many species that seem abundant in summer become rare in winter, their populations sustained by recruits from the subtidal or from other regions carried in as larvae. Symbiotic relationships add another layer of complexity. Some anemones harbour symbiotic algae, zooxanthellae, within their tissues, similar to the relationship in corals. These algae photosynthesize, producing sugars that the anemone can absorb, supplementing its diet of captured prey. In return, the algae receive protection and access to nutrients from the anemone's waste. Anemones with zooxanthellae often have a greenish tint, the colour of the algae visible through translucent tissues. These anemones can survive in areas where prey is scarce, relying partly on the food produced by their symbionts. Anemones without zooxanthellae must feed more actively, capturing enough prey to meet all their energy needs. Clownfish and anemones, famous for their partnership in tropical reefs, don't occur in temperate tide pools, but analogous relationships exist. Some crabs carry anemones on their shells, transplanting them by picking them up and placing them there. The anemones benefit from being moved to new feeding locations. The crab benefits from the anemone's stinging tentacles, which deter predators from attacking the crab's shell. It's a mobile partnership, the crab farming defensive weapons, and the anemones hitching rides to richer feeding grounds. Even the smallest organisms form networks. Bacteria colonizing rock surfaces produce biofilms that other microbes and algae settle on. These biofilms become food for grazers, and the grazers in turn attract predators. The microbial community, though invisible, is foundational, starting the process of colonization that eventually builds into the full complexity of a mature tide pool ecosystem. Disturbances, whether from storms or from human activity, reset this succession, creating patches at different stages of development. A recently scoured rock might have only bacteria and diatoms. A rock undisturbed for months or years might support diverse algae, encrusting animals, and the full complement of mobile species. The pool becomes a landscape of different ages and stages, each one supporting slightly different communities. This heterogeneity within and among pools is part of what makes tide pools so biologically rich. No two pools are identical. Even pools right next to each other can have different species compositions because of slight differences in depth, connectivity to the ocean, substrate texture, or history. This variation spreads risk. If conditions in one pool become lethal, perhaps due to extreme heating or a pollution event, animals in neighbouring pools may survive. Larvae from these survivors can recolonize the affected pool once conditions improve. The network of pools across a rocky shore acts as a metapopulation, subpopulations linked by dispersal, buffering against local extinctions and maintaining diversity across the landscape. Life in tide pools requires resilience, the ability to recover from disturbances that would devastate organisms from more stable habitats. And tide pool animals demonstrate resilience in ways that seem almost supernatural to those of us who don't live in such extremes. Regeneration is perhaps the most visible form of resilience. Sea stars, as we've noted, can regrow lost arms. The process takes weeks to months, but it's complete. A new arm grows from the stump, complete with tube feet, a radial canal, and all the internal structures. In some species, if a severed arm retains part of the central disc, it can regenerate an entire new body, essentially cloning the original animal. This ability lets sea stars survive attacks by predators that tear off arms or injuries from being crushed between rocks during storms. Sea cucumbers, another echinoderm, take regeneration even further. When threatened by predators, some species can eviscerate, expelling their internal organs through their anus. The predator gets a meal, but the sea cucumber survives, crawling away to regenerate its lost guts over the next several weeks. It's an extreme form of autotomy, sacrificing part of the body to save the whole. During regeneration, the sea cucumber doesn't feed, relying on stored energy reserves. But once the organs are regrown, it resumes normal activity as if nothing happened. Crabs regenerate lost limbs at each molt. A crab that loses a claw to a predator or a territorial fight will grow a new one, though the replacement is often smaller than the original at first. With subsequent molts, the claw increases in size, eventually matching the other claw. This ability reduces the long-term cost of injury. A crab doesn't need to survive its entire life intact. It just needs to survive long enough to molt and regrow what it lost. Even some mollusks can repair shells. A limpet whose shell is chipped by a predator will secrete new calcium carbonate to patch the damage, smoothing over the crack and restoring the shell's integrity. The repair is visible, a slightly different color or texture than the original shell, but functionally it works. Snails do the same, and even barnacles can repair cracks in their protective plates. This repair capacity is vital in a habitat where physical damage is routine, where storms throw rocks around and predators constantly test defenses. Beyond regeneration, many tide pool animals tolerate environmental extremes that would kill most other organisms. Some sea anemones can survive freezing, their tissues becoming ice-filled but not fatally damaged. Special compounds in their cells, cryoprotectants, prevent ice crystals from rupturing membranes. When temperatures rise, the anemones thaw and resume normal function. Other species tolerate extreme heat, their proteins stabilized by molecular chaperones that prevent denaturation even at temperatures approaching 50 degrees Celsius. Desiccation tolerance is another superpower. Periwinkles can lose up to 70% of their body water and still recover when rehydrated. Their metabolism slows to near zero. They enter a state of dormancy, and they wait. When the tide returns or rain falls, they absorb water, rehydrate, and resume activity. This tolerance allows them to live in the very highest reaches of the intertidal, zones so dry that most marine animals can't survive. It's life on the edge between sea and land, and the periwinkles have adapted so thoroughly that they're almost amphibious, comfortable in neither fully aquatic nor fully terrestrial habitats, but specialized for the transition between them. Flexibility in diet helps as well. Many tide pool animals are generalists, able to eat a variety of foods. A crab might prefer certain prey, but if those aren't available, it will switch to others. An omnivore or scavenger, it consumes algae, dead fish, smaller invertebrates, whatever it encounters. This dietary flexibility provides resilience against fluctuations in food availability. When one resource is scarce, the animal switches to another. Specialists, animals that rely on a single food source, are rarer in tide pools, perhaps because specialization is risky in such a variable environment. Behavioral plasticity complements physiological tolerance. Animals that can adjust their activity patterns, moving to more favorable microhabitats or altering the timing of feeding and reproduction, cope better with variability. A limpet that normally feeds at night might switch to daytime feeding if nighttime temperatures drop too low. A crab that usually forages on exposed rock might retreat to crevices if gull predation increases. These adjustments happen within individual lifetimes, the animal responding to immediate conditions rather than waiting for evolutionary change. It's plasticity at the level of behavior and physiology, giving the animal multiple strategies to deploy depending on circumstances. Climate change poses new challenges. Ocean temperatures are rising, affecting the thermal limits of tide pool species. Heat waves, periods of unusually high temperatures, can cause mass mortality, particularly in high intertidal pools that already experience extreme heating. Ocean acidification, caused by rising carbon dioxide levels, affects animals with calcium carbonate shells and skeletons, making it harder to build and maintain these structures. Changes in storm frequency and intensity alter the physical disturbance regime, potentially increasing the rate at which habitats are scoured or destroyed. And yet, there's reason for cautious optimism. Tide pool animals have been dealing with variability and extremes for millions of years. They've evolved resilience as a core feature of their biology. As conditions change, natural selection will favor those individuals best able to cope with the new conditions. Populations will shift in distribution, moving toward cooler or more favorable habitats. Species with high genetic diversity and broad tolerances may adapt relatively quickly to new conditions. Others may struggle, and some may decline or disappear from parts of their range. Human impacts, particularly pollution and habitat destruction, compound these challenges. Tide pools near urban areas often suffer from runoff carrying pesticides, heavy metals, and excess nutrients. Coastal development destroys intertidal habitat outright, replacing natural shorelines with seawalls and armoring that provide far less habitat complexity. Over-harvesting of intertidal species for food or bait reduces populations, sometimes to the point where recovery is difficult. These impacts are more acute than climate change in many locations, and addressing them requires conscious effort and policy interventions. Conservation of tide pools starts with protecting the habitats themselves. Marine protected areas, where collecting is prohibited and habitats are left undisturbed, allow populations to recover and ecosystems to function more naturally. Education helps as well. Teaching people to move gently through tide pools, to turn over rocks carefully and replace them as they were found, to avoid stepping on animals and algae, reduces casual damage. Tide pools are resilient, but they're not invulnerable. Respect and careful management can help ensure that these remarkable ecosystems continue to thrive for future generations to explore and wonder at. The intertidal is a narrow band, often just meters wide. Yet, it holds lessons about survival, adaptation, and the limits of life. Every organism here pushes boundaries, living at the edge of what biology can tolerate. And in pushing those boundaries, they show us what resilience really means. Not just enduring, but thriving. Not just surviving change, but adapting to it, growing into it, making it part of the rhythm of life. These animals don't fight the tides. They flow with them twice a day, every day, for their entire lives. And in that rhythm, they found not just a way to survive, but a way to flourish in one of Earth's most dynamic, beautiful, and challenging places. Standing at the edge of a tide pool, watching water slowly creep back in as the tide turns, you witness the beginning of a transformation. What was isolated becomes connected. What was still becomes lively. Tentacles unfurl from collapsed blobs that were sea anemones. Barnacles open their volcano caps and begin sweeping their kiri through the refreshing water. Limpets loosen their grip on home scars and start their slow crawls across rock, heading out to feed now that the moisture has returned. The pool wakes up, and with it, the whole intertidal comes alive again. We've explored how these animals manage the impossible, how they cling to rock against waves that should sweep them away, how they breathe both water and air, switching between two respiratory worlds, how they move using hydraulic systems that seem borrowed from engineering diagrams, how they reproduce despite being glued in place or scattered across vast distances, how they feed in ecosystems so dense with interactions that every species affects every other, how they defend themselves with shells, toxins, and behaviors refined by millions of years of predation, how they create and exploit microhabitats, turning a seemingly uniform stretch of rock into a complex landscape of opportunity and challenge. But most of all, we've seen resilience. The fundamental truth of tide pools is that conditions change, constantly and dramatically, and life here has learned not just to tolerate that change, but to thrive within it. These animals don't have the luxury of stable environments. They don't get to live in water that's always the right temperature, the right salinity, the right oxygen level. They don't get to avoid the sun, the wind, the waves. They face all of it, twice a day, and they've turned that challenge into opportunity. It's humbling in a way. We humans build cities to control our environment, heating and cooling the air, piping in fresh water, keeping out the weather. We go to great lengths to avoid discomfort, to maintain stability. But these tiny animals, most no larger than your thumb, some no larger than a grain of rice, live entirely at the mercy of forces they can't control. And yet, they not only survive, they build complex societies. They feed and grow and reproduce. They fill every available niche with life. There's a lesson there about what's possible when adaptation meets necessity, when evolution has time to solve problems that seem, at first glance, impossible to solve. The tide pools aren't going anywhere. They've been here for as long as there have been rocky shores and tides, which is to say, for most of Earth's history. And they'll be here long after we're gone, assuming we don't destroy them first through pollution or development. They're ancient ecosystems, older than forests, older than grasslands, older perhaps than anything except the ocean itself. The animals living in them today are descendants of lineages that stretch back hundreds of millions of years, survivors of countless mass extinctions, adapters to changing climates and shifting continents. They're tested, proven, resilient beyond measure. So the next time you find yourself near a rocky shore at low tide, take a moment. Crouch down beside a pool, look closely. Watch the barnacles wave their feeding appendages. Watch a sea star creep slowly across stone, tube feet, gripping and releasing in rippling waves. Watch a limpet scrape algae, leaving a clean trail behind it. Watch an anemone pulse gently in the current, tentacles swaying, waiting for prey. These are lives being lived at the edge of what's possible, and they're magnificent in their simplicity and their complexity both. If these calm explorations into the biology of tide pools have helped you unwind, or given you something to ponder as you drift off to sleep, consider liking this video and subscribing to Bedtime Biology. Share your thoughts in the comments if you have a favorite tide pool memory, or if there are other topics you'd like us to explore. Every subscription, every comment, helps others find their way here too. One sleepy soul at a time, all of us learning together about the quiet wonders of the natural world. And remember, Whether you're watching from a city far from any ocean, or from a place where you can hear waves from your windows, the tide pools are out there, rising and falling, their inhabitants clinging and breathing and feeding and thriving, twice a day, every day, in rhythm with the moon. Sleep well and know that somewhere tonight, between ocean and land, life continues its ancient, resilient dance with the tides.